The three of us had been planning this hike for weeks. It was late summer, the air still warm but not suffocating, and the sky was a pale, cloudless blue that made the peaks stand out sharp against the horizon. We'd chosen a trail in the mountains that was supposed to be moderate. Not too easy, not too hard, with a mix of forest, rocky ridges, and open stretches where you could see for miles. We set off in the morning, the dirt path already dry under our boots. Pine needles crunched lightly with every step. The trail wound upward in a slow incline, cutting through pockets of shade where tall trees rose close together and patches of sun where the branches opened up. The air smelled faintly of resin and damp earth. Every so often, a breeze would come through and carry the sharp, clean scent of the pines. We talked at first, nothing important, just the usual stuff. Weekend plans, old jokes, small complaints about work. The sound of our voices felt swallowed up by the openness of the mountains, like they didn't carry far before disappearing. After a while, we grew quieter, focusing more on the steady rhythm of walking. My legs were warming up, that dull ache in the calves settling into something steady. About halfway through the climb, the trail curved along the side of a slope. To our right, the ground fell away sharply into a gully. It wasn't a sheer drop, but it was steep enough that sliding down it would be a bad idea. At the bottom, maybe 50 or 60 feet down, was a bed of rocks and what looked like a trickle of water running through them. The slope was cluttered with loose soil, scrub bushes, and the occasional tree gripping on with its roots exposed. That's when we saw it, a rope. It was tied around the trunk of a thick pine tree, the knot dark with dirt, and it dangled straight down into the gully. The rope was old but not frayed, thick enough to support someone's weight. It swayed slightly, brushing against the bark as the breeze moved it. From where we stood, you could follow it down visually for maybe 20 feet before it disappeared into the shadow where the slope got steeper. It immediately caught our attention because it didn't belong. This was a hiking trail, not a climbing route, and there were no official markings or signs suggesting you should go down there. It wasn't even near a scenic overlook, just an unremarkable bend in the trail. We slowed down, curiosity making us drift toward it. One of my friends, Mark, reached out and grabbed it, giving it a few short tugs. It was anchored solidly to the tree, the fibers biting into his palm as he pulled. The sound of it shifting slightly in the knot was dull and dry. I remember noticing that it looked like it had been there a while. There was dirt ground into it, and some of the outer fibers were fuzzy from wear. We didn't say much. I think we were all just wondering the same thing: who put it there and why? Maybe someone used it for fishing down in the stream below, or maybe it was a shortcut to somewhere. Then it happened. From below, muffled at first, there was a voice. A man's voice, sharp and sudden. "Hey, stop!" The sound froze me instantly. It was close enough to feel personal, like it was directed right at us. I looked at the others. Mark's hand was still on the rope. Before any of us could react beyond that, we heard scrambling. Not the kind of slow, careful movement you'd expect from someone climbing. This was fast, urgent. Shoes scraping against rock and dirt, loose stones clattering down the slope. The sound grew louder, moving up toward us at a speed that didn't feel casual at all. Something in my chest tightened. It was instinct, the same kind you get when you hear a branch snap in the dark. My skin prickled, and my stomach felt hollow. We didn't stop to think. Mark dropped the rope like it was burning his hand, and we all turned and started moving up the trail. Not a jog, not a brisk walk, we ran. The trail wasn't straight. It twisted around bends, dipped under low branches, and occasionally narrowed where the slope pressed close. My boots pounded against the dirt, lungs pulling in air that felt too thin. Every muscle in my legs screamed almost immediately, but I kept going, glancing over my shoulder whenever I could. At first, I could still hear it, the sound of someone following, the crunch of dirt, and the occasional quick skid of a shoe losing grip on loose rock. But with every turn we took, it was harder to tell if it was still there, or if I was just hearing my own blood pounding in my ears. We didn't talk. None of us asked what the hell was going on. All I could focus on was the trail ahead and the thought of getting to somewhere, anywhere, with other people. The idea of stopping to figure it out didn't even cross my mind. Eventually, the slope eased up, and we hit a section of trail that was wider and less steep. My breath was ragged, and my throat burned. My legs felt heavy and rubbery, like they didn't quite belong to me anymore. But I didn't slow down until we spotted movement ahead. 2 hikers were coming toward us. Middle-aged, carrying trekking poles, their clothes dusty like they'd been out all day. The sight of them hit me with a kind of relief that felt almost physical. We slowed down, not wanting to crash into them, but my pulse was still racing. We passed them without saying much, just a quick nod. I could tell by their expressions that they noticed something was off with us, but they didn't ask. I didn't look back again. We kept going until the trail started its descent back toward the parking area. Only then did we finally stop, leaning over with hands on our knees, trying to catch our breath. My shirt was damp with sweat, and I could feel my heart still pounding hard against my ribs. We didn't see anyone else behind us for the rest of the hike. No one passed us coming up from the direction of the rope. But that didn't settle the unease. The thing that stayed with me wasn't just the voice or the scrambling. It was the way it happened, how quickly that moment shifted from curiosity to a full-on bolt. The rope hadn't looked like an invitation for adventure anymore. It looked like something meant for a reason we didn't want to know. Even now, I wonder who was down there, and what they would have done if we'd stayed just a little longer. The air was already warm when Jake and I started out that morning, the kind of dry heat that makes the back of your throat feel like sandpaper even before you've taken a sip of water. The parking lot at the trailhead was just a dusty pull-off from a 2-lane road, a flat space with a few sun-faded posts and a small wooden sign about desert safety. We'd been planning this hike for weeks. Jake had read about the trail online, a narrow path winding through a series of red rock canyons, about 8 miles out and back. Nothing too extreme, but far enough from the city to feel like we were really out in the wild. The first stretch was open and exposed, the sun hitting us full on, and the ground crunching under our boots with every step. The desert around us was a mix of reddish sand and hard-packed dirt, dotted with low, thorny plants and the occasional twisted juniper tree. The air smelled faintly of dust and something sharp, like dry sage. The trail was marked by cairns, small stacks of stones people had built to guide hikers, and every few minutes we'd pass another one. The rocks balanced in uneven little towers. Some were just 3 stones high, others 5 or 6, all of them sun-bleached and rough. As we got deeper into the canyon, the walls rose up around us, blocking some of the sun. The rock faces were streaked with different shades of red and orange, and here and there, you could see lines where floods had carved channels down the stone. The sound of our boots echoed in certain narrow spots, mixing with the distant hum of insects. It was quiet otherwise, no voices, no wind, no sign of anyone else. We hadn't seen another person since leaving the lot, and it felt like the whole place belonged to us. We stopped a few times to drink water. Jake had a big steel bottle clipped to the outside of his backpack with a carabiner. I remember seeing it swing when he walked. He kept it there because it was easier to grab without taking his pack off. We checked our phones for GPS, not because we were lost, the cairns were easy to follow, but because we liked tracking our pace. Service was spotty. My phone showed 1 bar, then none. About 4 miles in, the canyon widened, and the ground leveled out into a kind of sandy flat between 2 taller cliffs. We sat down on a rock in the shade to eat a snack. My shirt was damp with sweat along the back, and the heat seemed to cling to my skin even in the shadow of the rock face. After 15 minutes, we got moving again, talking less now, just listening to our footsteps and the crunch of gravel under our boots. It was maybe 20 minutes later that I saw it. Another cairn up ahead, taller than the others. It looked fresh somehow. The rocks weren't as sun-bleached, and they were stacked more neatly than most of the ones we'd passed. I didn't think much about it at first. People add new markers all the time. But when we got closer, I noticed something that made me stop walking. On top of the cairn, balanced perfectly on the highest stone, was Jake's water bottle. I knew it was his before I even looked at him. The silver metal was scratched in the same place near the base. The black cap had the same little dent. The carabiner was still clipped to the handle. It was the exact bottle I'd seen swinging from his pack earlier. And yet, there it was, sitting upright like someone had placed it there on purpose. I felt my stomach tighten. Jake stepped closer, and I saw his shoulders stiffen. His pack was still on his back, but the bottle was gone from it. The carabiner clip hung empty. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The fact that it was there, on top of that pile of rocks, halfway through a trail we'd been walking for hours, in a place where we hadn't seen a single person, it didn't make sense. There was no sound, no sign of movement anywhere around us. The air felt heavier somehow, like the heat had thickened it. We didn't touch the bottle. We didn't even stand there long. I just glanced at Jake, and I could tell we were thinking the same thing. Something wasn't right. Whoever had taken it off his pack had done it without either of us noticing, and they'd gone ahead of us on the trail to leave it there, which meant someone had been close enough to unclip something from his bag while we walked, close enough to know exactly where we were headed. We didn't turn around and go back the way we'd come. That would have meant passing whoever had done it, assuming they were still behind us. Instead, Jake pointed off to the side, toward a slope of loose rock and scrub that led up toward the edge of the canyon. It wasn't part of the trail, but it seemed like it might lead toward open ground. The climb was rough. The ground shifted under our boots, and dry plants scratched at our legs. My throat burned from the heat and the effort, but I didn't stop. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone step into view on the trail below. Every time I looked, the path was empty, the cairn still standing there with the bottle on top. When we reached the top of the slope, the land flattened into a wide stretch of broken rock and pale sand. The sun was blinding, the glare reflecting off everything. There was no trail here, no markers, just open desert. We picked a direction, toward where we thought the road might be, and kept moving. My boots crunched over loose stones, my shirt clung to my back, and every few minutes I'd hear the faint rattle of something in the brush. I told myself it was lizards, maybe snakes, but I didn't look too closely. Time seemed to stretch out. The heat pressed down on us, and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. My mouth was so dry it hurt to swallow. We stopped once under the thin shadow of a lone rock outcrop, but neither of us wanted to rest long. The urge to keep going, to put as much distance as possible between us and that cairn, was stronger than the exhaustion. Eventually, the ground started to slope downward, and in the distance I caught a glint of something, metal catching the sun. A few more minutes and I saw it clearly. The roof of a car. Relief hit me hard. We kept moving, faster now, until we could see the narrow strip of road and the dusty parking lot where we'd started hours before. When we got to the car, the lot was empty except for our vehicle. No other cars, no signs of anyone else. We climbed in, shut the doors, and sat there for a long moment in the silence, the air inside the car stifling hot. My shirt was soaked through with sweat, and my hands were shaking without me realizing it. I thought about the bottle, about how someone had to be close enough to take it without either of us noticing, and about the fact that we never heard a single footstep, never saw a shadow, never felt a presence until that moment we saw it on the rocks. Whoever it was, they'd moved through that canyon without making a sound, close enough to touch us, close enough to decide to let us know they were there. We didn't go back for the rest of the hike. We didn't tell anyone at the trailhead because there was no one to tell. On the drive home, the red cliffs faded in the rear view, and the road unrolled endlessly ahead of us. I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see a figure walking along the shoulder of the road, carrying a silver water bottle in their hand. Even now, I can still picture it exactly as it was, balanced perfectly on that stack of rocks, catching the sunlight like it had been placed there just for us to find. Not stolen, not hidden, just set there waiting. I parked my car at the small dirt pull-off at the edge of the trailhead just after sunrise. The air was cool, heavy with the faint salt of the ocean carried on the wind. This hike was supposed to be a long coastal loop, a mix of forest paths and cliffside overlooks. It wasn't a popular one. I had read online that most people avoided it because the trail could be rough and overgrown in places. That was fine with me. I liked the quiet, the kind where you can hear nothing but your own footsteps and the wind through the trees. The first mile was easy. The trail started wide and well-marked, winding through patches of low brush before slipping into a darker section of forest. The sound of the ocean faded as the trees grew taller and thicker, the path narrowing until it felt like walking through a tunnel of green. I could still catch glimpses of light breaking through the canopy here and there, and occasionally I'd hear gulls somewhere far off. My boots crunched on a mix of dirt and pine needles, and I kept a steady pace, taking in the smell of damp earth. It was somewhere around the second mile that I noticed it. Faint at first, just a whisper of something acrid on the breeze. It was sharp, chemical, different from the natural smells around me. Burning plastic, that's exactly what it was. I slowed my pace, sniffing the air, thinking maybe there were campers nearby and someone had thrown some trash into their fire. I hadn't seen another car at the trailhead, but there were other access points a few miles down the coast. The smell grew stronger as I kept walking. It came in waves, carried by the wind, each time hitting harder, more bitter, almost making my eyes water. I thought about turning around, but I told myself I was probably just passing near a campsite or maybe an old burn pile. The forest here grew denser, the light dimmer. The trees were packed tightly together, their trunks straight and tall, the ground between them cluttered with fallen branches and patches of ferns. My footsteps felt loud against the hush. Even the gulls were gone. I came around a gentle bend, and that's when I saw it. Right in the middle of the trail ahead was a small pile of belongings. They weren't scattered like someone had dropped them in a rush. They were placed there almost neatly. A faded blue backpack sat at the center, its zipper half open. Next to it, a rolled-up windbreaker lay partly unrolled, a pair of thick wool socks draped across it. All of it was smoldering, thin black smoke curling upward from the fabric. The smoke hissed faintly, the sound of heat eating through material. There was no fire pit, no rocks arranged in a ring, no sign that anyone had tried to build a proper fire. It was just these belongings, right on the dirt path, slowly burning. I froze. The smell was stronger now, the stench of melting synthetic fibers mixed with something else. Maybe nylon, maybe rubber. The sight of it was strange, wrong. I stood still for several seconds, scanning the trees on either side. The forest was completely silent. No wind in the branches, no bird calls, no rustle of animals in the undergrowth. I took a careful step forward, just enough to see if there was anything else in the pile. I could make out part of a notebook sticking from the backpack side pocket, its edges curling from the heat. A plastic water bottle lay on its side, its shape warped. The burning was controlled somehow, not a full blaze, but enough to make everything blacken and deform. I listened harder, holding my breath. Still nothing. No voices, no footsteps, no movement. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Whoever left this here couldn't have been gone for long. Things don't just start burning like this and then sit alone in the middle of the woods. I stepped back, slow and deliberate. My eyes kept flicking between the pile and the tree line, expecting, I don't even know what, someone to step out, someone to be watching. When I was about 10 steps back, I turned around and started walking the way I'd come. I didn't run, not yet. Running makes noise, draws attention. I just walked quickly, breathing through my mouth, my boots hitting the dirt harder than before. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder. At first, I could still see the faint ribbon of smoke in the air behind me, but soon the bend in the trail hid it. That didn't make me feel better. The forest felt different now. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every patch of brush felt like it could hide someone crouched low. My hearing seemed sharper, like I could pick out each creak of the trees or the crunch of my own steps. I kept thinking about how quiet it had been when I first saw the pile, how unnatural that silence had felt. I passed landmarks I recognized, a crooked cedar leaning over the trail, a mossy boulder with a split down the middle, but they looked different now, less familiar, like I'd somehow wandered into a slightly altered version of the same path. I realized I was speeding up without meaning to, my body wanting distance as fast as possible. The smell lingered faintly, even as I moved farther away. That bothered me. It was as if it had clung to my clothes, my hair. After about 20 minutes of walking fast, I reached the edge of the forest where the trees thinned and the sky opened up. I could see the shimmer of the ocean again through breaks in the brush. I paused here, partly to catch my breath and partly to listen. The ocean was louder now, waves hitting the shore far below the cliffs. But I still kept scanning the trees behind me. I told myself there was no one there, that it was just some abandoned junk someone had burned for reasons I'd never know. But my mind kept turning it over, the neatness of how it had been arranged, the fact that there'd been no one in sight, the strange timing of it still being hot and smoking right as I came around the bend. When the trailhead came into view, I didn't slow down until I was at my car. My keys were already in my hand. I unlocked the door, got in, and shut it quickly. The sound of the door closing felt too loud. I started the engine, pulling out onto the narrow dirt road without looking back. The whole drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I didn't know what I expected to see. Maybe nothing, maybe someone stepping out of the woods onto the road behind me. I never reported it. I didn't want to explain what I'd seen, didn't want questions about why I hadn't stayed or checked for help. All I could think about was that feeling in the pit of my stomach when I first saw the pile, that I wasn't supposed to be there, that I had walked into something in the middle of happening. Even now, weeks later, I still catch myself smelling it sometimes. That sharp, chemical burn, and it makes me wonder if someone had been standing just out of sight, waiting for me to move on. The trailhead was empty when I parked. It was late morning in early autumn, the kind of day when the sky is pale blue and the sun feels warm but the air still has that sharp edge. The forest spread out in all directions, the leaves shifting from green to gold and rusty orange. A few had already fallen, collecting in quiet piles along the path. I'd picked this trail because it was less popular than the others. I wanted to be alone, just me and the woods, no small talk with strangers. The trail was narrow, with roots and rocks jutting up through the dirt. My boots crunched over dry leaves as I started, the sound loud in the stillness. Every now and then, a gust of wind would send a scatter of leaves spiraling down, or the branches would creak overhead. There was no traffic noise, no voices, just the muted thud of my footsteps and the occasional bird call from somewhere deep in the trees. After about 2 miles, I stopped to drink some water and checked the map on my phone. The trail wound deep into the forest, then looped back toward the parking lot. I figured I'd hike the whole loop, around 8 or 9 miles. It would give me plenty of daylight to finish and still get home before dark. Around mile 3, I realized I hadn't seen anyone since I left my car. It wasn't unusual, but there was a strange kind of quiet today. Even the birds seemed muted. I kept going, enjoying the crunch of leaves under my boots, the way the air smelled faintly of earth and pine. The trail curved and dipped, weaving between tall, thin trees whose trunks were dark and damp near the base. That's when I noticed movement ahead, a flicker of color between the trees. A man in a bright yellow jacket. He was far enough away that I couldn't make out his face, but the jacket was vivid, almost too bright against the muted colors of the forest. I figured he must be another hiker, maybe someone who'd started earlier and was looping back. I didn't think much of it at first. I kept walking, my pace steady. Every time the trail curved, I expected to see him a little closer. But each time I rounded a bend, he was still just ahead, the same distance away. He never glanced back, never slowed down. After a while, I realized I was walking faster without meaning to. Something about the way he stayed exactly that far ahead bothered me. My footsteps crunched louder as I sped up, and in the spaces between those crunches, I thought I heard his, just slightly quicker than mine. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. He was probably just keeping his own pace, unaware of me entirely. But then we reached a long, straight stretch of trail, the kind where you can see far ahead. I could see him clearly now, medium height, dark pants, yellow jacket, short dark hair under a cap. And he was definitely moving faster than before. It didn't make sense. Most hikers I'd seen over the years didn't change speed like that unless they were running late or trying to beat the weather. But the sky was still clear, the air calm. The trail wasn't difficult. I kept at it, thinking maybe I'd just pass him and then put some distance between us. But no matter how much I pushed, he kept his lead. My breathing got heavier, and I could feel the warmth gathering under my jacket despite the cool air. Eventually, the trail came to a fork, Both directions disappeared into the trees, one veering left and climbing slightly, the other heading right and sloping downward. The leaves on the ground were undisturbed, no fresh footprints, no sign of movement. The man was gone. I stopped, trying to listen. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just the faint hiss of wind through the branches. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I chose the left trail without thinking much, just wanting to keep moving. My boots slipped on the damp leaves as the trail climbed. I tried to keep my pace steady, but I could feel a knot of unease growing in my stomach. 15 minutes later, I glanced over my shoulder and froze. He was standing in the middle of the trail behind me, closer now, not walking, not moving at all, just standing. His yellow jacket was bright against the brown and gold of the forest. His head was tilted slightly, like he was watching me. I didn't call out. I didn't wave. I turned forward and started walking faster. My legs felt heavy, and my breath came quicker. Every few steps I glanced back, and each time he was still there, still not moving. The trail dipped and curved again, and I lost sight of him. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. My whole body felt wired, every sound sharpened. The crack of a branch in the distance, the hiss of leaves under my boots. I started to run, not a full sprint, but enough to make my pack bounce against my shoulders. My boots thudded against the dirt, and I could feel the strain in my calves as the trail wound upward again. When I finally slowed, the forest was silent except for my breathing. I turned and looked back. Nothing. The trail was empty. My mouth was dry, and I could feel my pulse in my neck. I kept moving, faster now, counting the turns and landmarks, trying to remember how far I was from the trailhead. My watch said I'd gone a little over 5 miles. That meant I still had several miles left if I stuck to the loop. I decided to cut it short. There was a side trail ahead that led back toward the parking area, a more direct route. When I reached it, I turned without hesitation. This path was narrower, the ground uneven, littered with rocks and tangled roots. My boots caught on them a few times, nearly tripping me. The trees here were denser, blocking more of the light. After a while, I risked one more glance over my shoulder. He was there again, closer than before. This time, his head wasn't tilted. He was facing me directly, his shoulders squared. I couldn't see his expression, too far for that, but the stillness of him was worse than if he'd been moving. I didn't stop to think. I bolted, my pack dug into my shoulders, my breath tearing in and out. The path twisted and dropped suddenly, and I slid on the leaves, catching myself against a tree. My ankle twinged, but I kept going. The forest blurred around me, just flashes of color and shadow. Every muscle in my legs burned, but I didn't slow down. I didn't look back again. I could hear my own heartbeat, my breath ragged and loud in my ears. When I finally burst out of the tree line, the sight of the empty parking lot almost made my knees give out. My car was the only one there, sitting in the pale sunlight like nothing had happened. I yanked the door open and dropped into the seat, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly it took 2 tries to get the engine started. As I pulled out, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The trail entrance was just visible between the trees. He was standing there, not moving, not following, just watching as I drove away. I didn't stop until I was back on the main road, the forest shrinking in the distance. My hands stayed tight on the wheel the whole way home. That night, when I lay in bed, the image kept replaying in my mind. The yellow jacket, the stillness, the way he always stayed just far enough away until he didn't. The next day, I looked up reports from that national forest. I didn't find anything about a man in a yellow jacket. No warnings, no recent incidents. But I did find something else, an old forum thread from a couple of years back, where hikers had posted about someone who followed them on less used trails, never speaking, never getting close, always watching. The posts ended abruptly after a few weeks. No updates, no explanation. I haven't gone back to that forest since. I don't think I ever will. I woke up before sunrise in the small motel room I had rented the night before. The thin curtains barely kept out the glow of the streetlight outside. but I didn't mind. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there because this trip had been on my list for months. 2 days of hiking and 1 night alone at a remote lake deep inside the backcountry. No cell service, no crowds, no noise except for wind and water. I had mapped the route, packed my gear, and told myself it was exactly what I needed. By the time I loaded my pack into the car, the air was still cold enough to see my breath. The drive to the trailhead was quiet and empty, the road winding through stretches of pine forest and steep rocky slopes. I stopped once at a small gas station to grab a coffee I didn't really need, just for the warmth. The sky was pale blue when I pulled into the small dirt lot. There were only 2 other cars parked there, both with dust on them like they had been sitting for a day or 2. I shouldered my pack, adjusted the straps until the weight felt balanced, and started toward the narrow trail that cut into the trees. The first mile was steady uphill. The ground was damp from the rain earlier in the week, and my boots made a muted crunch over wet leaves and soft soil. The forest was thick here, old-growth pines, trunks straight and tall, their tops swaying gently in the breeze. I kept a steady pace, letting the air fill with the scent of pine sap and cold earth. As I climbed higher, the sound of the road faded away completely. It felt like stepping into a sealed-off world, one where nothing existed except the trail in front of me and the endless trees pressing in from all sides. Around mid-morning, I stopped at a small clearing where the sun broke through the branches. I dropped my pack, stretched my shoulders, and drank from my water bottle. From here, the trail dipped into a narrow valley, then followed a creek upstream toward the lake. I crossed the water 3 times on slick wooden planks, the kind that seemed like they had been there for decades. My footsteps echoed softly in the quiet, and the only other sound was the rush of water beneath. It was early afternoon when the trail began to level out. The forest opened slightly, and I caught my first glimpse of the lake between the trees, still and silver in the distance. The shoreline curved into a half-moon shape, with a small gravel beach at one end. Just behind it was a flat, grassy area shaded by a few scattered pines, the kind of spot any backpacker would pick first. And right there, in the middle of it, was a tent. It was an older-style, faded blue nylon, the kind you see in old gear catalogs. The rainfly was on, and the zipper was closed. I slowed my steps, not wanting to startle anyone. From where I stood, I couldn't see any movement around it. I stopped a few yards away and called out, my voice carrying across the still air. No answer. I called again, a little louder. Still nothing. I waited a few moments, scanning the area. There was no pack, no camp chair, no cooking gear, no boots or jackets left outside. Just the tent, perfectly zipped, sitting in the middle of the clearing. The water behind it shimmered in the light, the surface almost glassy. I decided not to bother them, whoever them was. Maybe they were out hiking one of the side trails, or fishing on the far side of the lake. I found a spot a few hundred feet away, just off the main path, and set up my own camp. My tent went up quickly, and I staked it down against the light breeze. The ground here was soft and flat, almost too perfect. Once camp was ready, I filtered water from the lake and ate a late lunch, just a tortilla with peanut butter and a handful of trail mix. I kept glancing toward the other tent, expecting to see someone come back. The sun drifted lower, painting the tops of the trees gold, but the tent remained still. By evening, it was starting to bother me. The air cooled fast, and the first faint wisps of mist began curling up from the water. I lit my small camp stove and boiled water for noodles, the flame making a soft hiss. My headlamp sat beside me, but I didn't turn it on yet. The shadows deepened across the lake, and the stillness settled heavier. No footsteps, no laughter, no clink of metal on metal from a cooking pot. I told myself maybe they were spending the night somewhere else and had just left the tent there. It didn't make sense, but it was the only explanation I could make stick in my mind. The moon was just coming up when I decided to check. The quiet had grown so complete that it felt wrong, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I grabbed my light, adjusted it to a dim beam, and walked toward the blue tent. My boots crunched over the thin layer of frost forming on the grass. The nylon glowed faintly in the moonlight, the fabric unmoving. I crouched down and pressed 2 fingers lightly against the side of the tent. Cold. I tugged at the zipper just enough to open a narrow gap. The beam from my headlamp slid inside. Empty. Not just empty, bare. No sleeping bag, no stove, no food, no extra clothing. Just a single blanket, folded with sharp edges, lying in the middle of the floor like it had been placed there for display. Beside it, at the foot end, was a pair of boots. They were dark brown leather, worn but cared for, laces tucked neatly inside. They were lined up perfectly parallel, toes pointing toward the door. That was it. No signs of a struggle, no mess, no other gear at all. The cold air slid down my back as I backed away. My breath looked pale in the light, and I realized I was gripping my headlamp so tightly that my knuckles ached. Every instinct told me not to linger. I went straight back to my tent, shoving my stove and food into my pack without caring about the order. My hands shook as I pulled the stakes from the ground. The night was full now, moonlight breaking over the ripples of the lake, but it felt darker than it should. I swung my pack on and started down the trail, my headlamp beam bouncing over the frozen ground. The trees seemed closer, the path narrower than it had on the way in. Every sound, a twig snapping, the whisper of wind through branches, felt louder. I didn't stop, not even when the strap of my pack dug into my shoulder hard enough to leave a mark. The trail felt endless, but I pushed until the beam of my light caught the outline of the parking lot. My car sat alone now. The other 2 vehicles were gone. My breath was ragged when I unlocked the door and slid inside, shutting it with more force than I meant to. I sat there for a while, my hands still on the wheel, trying to figure out what exactly had happened. Couldn't. All I knew was that the image of that tent, empty except for a folded blanket and a neatly placed pair of boots, was burned into my mind. And the worst part wasn't wondering where the person had gone. It was knowing that they hadn't packed up. They hadn't left. They just weren't there anymore. I started the engine and drove away, the forest falling back into darkness in my rearview mirror. I didn't look back. I set out that morning with a plan to take an old logging road I'd read about online. According to a couple of trip reports, it used to connect to one of the main hiking trails in the area, a kind of shortcut that shaved off some elevation gain. It wasn't on any official maps anymore, but that just made it more appealing to me. I liked the feeling of walking where not many people go anymore. It was a cool, overcast day in early fall. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and earth, and the ground was still damp from rain the night before. My pack was light, just some water, snacks, a map, and my phone. I didn't expect anything difficult. The start of the logging road was wide, like a regular dirt road, though it was pitted with shallow puddles. Old tire ruts still ran down its center, frozen into place after years of disuse. It felt quiet in a way that was different from other hikes. No voices in the distance, no dogs barking from nearby houses, no low hum of traffic. Just the soft sound of my boots pressing into wet soil and the occasional flap of a crow's wings overhead. About 20 minutes in, the sides of the road started to close in a bit. Tall weeds brushed against my thighs, their seeds catching on the fabric of my pants. Saplings leaned in from both sides, their thin branches snapping lightly against my shoulders as I passed. The sunlight, already muted by clouds, was filtered even more by the tree canopy overhead. The road curved gently left and right, the sight lines never more than 30 or 40 feet ahead. There was something about that never seeing far that kept me alert. I reached a spot where the mud looked fresh, darker than the rest, and I slowed down, glancing down at the ground. That's when I saw the boot prints. They were sharp-edged, recent, not softened by rain or time. The tread was deep, clear enough that I could see the pattern. Small, square lugs in neat rows. The stride was steady, neither hurried nor dragging. They were going the same way I was, right up the road. That gave me a small push of confidence. Someone else had been here recently, which probably meant I was still on a passable route. I followed them without thinking much, keeping my pace even. The air grew stiller, heavy with that damp smell that comes before rain even when the sky's already gray. At one point, I stepped over an old, half-rotten log that lay across the road. The prince went over it too. A light breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of water somewhere downhill. A creek, maybe. I thought about how the road might drop down to meet it where it could join the main trail. But then, 20 minutes or so after I first saw the tracks, they just stopped. Not faded, not trampled over, just stopped. One clear print, then nothing. The ground ahead was the same muddy surface as before, still soft enough to take an impression, but it was blank. I stared at the spot for a good 30 seconds, scanning around. I even stepped off to the side, looking for where they might have veered into the weeds, but there was nothing. No crushed grass, no bent saplings. The air felt colder, though maybe that was just me noticing the stillness again. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe they'd stepped onto some hidden patch of harder ground, or a buried log under the mud. But it didn't explain why there was no sign of them anywhere beyond that point. Something about it put a weight in my chest. I decided to turn back. I didn't like the idea of pushing farther into a narrowing, unmarked road when someone's trail had ended so abruptly. I turned and started retracing my steps, moving at a steady pace. The trees seemed closer now, though I knew they weren't. I glanced behind me a few times out of habit, seeing only the same winding path and green-gray walls of vegetation. It was maybe 10 minutes later, as I came around a gentle bend, that I saw them. Boot prints. 2 sets. They were behind me now, in the mud I had walked through earlier. My own prints were there, wider apart with my tread pattern, but alongside them, close enough in places that they almost overlapped, was another set. Same tread pattern as the ones I'd seen earlier, and they hadn't been there when I first passed through. I was sure of that. I stopped cold, staring at them, my heart thudding in my ears. The second set wasn't following directly in my path. They weaved slightly in and out, like whoever it was had been moving just off to the side of me. Sometimes the prints were so close to mine that I imagined an arm could have reached out. I stood there, looking down the stretch of path I'd come from, but there was no movement, no sound except the faint drip of water from a branch somewhere nearby. I didn't think. I just started walking faster. My pack bounced against my back, the straps pulling at my shoulders. I looked over my shoulder every few seconds, scanning for movement. The path twisted and rose, and with every turn, I expected to see someone rounding it behind me. My breathing got heavier, not from exertion but from the awareness that I wasn't alone out there. As I moved, I tried to think of rational explanations. Maybe I had missed the second set earlier. Unlikely, given how fresh and sharp they were. Maybe someone had come onto the road from a side path, except I'd seen no sign of one, and the weeds and saplings on either side were dense enough that pushing through would have left some trace. The weeds brushed against my legs again, but now they felt more like a barrier I needed to push through, something slowing me down. My eyes kept flicking to the edges of the road, half expecting a figure to step out from the trees. I realized I was gripping my water bottle inside the side pocket of my pack, as if that would do anything. The old log I'd stepped over earlier came into view, and I moved around it quickly, not wanting to slow. A crow called somewhere above, startling me into glancing upward. My boots made fast, loud squelches in the mud now. I reached the wider part of the road, where the weeds thinned out and kept moving without pause. Every bend I passed, I expected to see something behind me. The sound of water grew louder. I remembered from the map that the main trail ran alongside a creek. That meant I was close. I pushed myself to move faster, my chest tight, my back prickling with the feeling of being watched. I didn't dare stop to check behind me anymore. My only focus was getting to where I knew other people might be. The road finally opened out, and I saw the main trail ahead. A broad, well-trodden dirt path with a couple of hikers visible in the distance. Relief hit me in a rush, but I didn't slow until I was right there, stepping onto the packed earth. My boots left thick smears of mud behind me. The other hikers glanced at me briefly as they passed, and I kept moving until there were more people around, until the trees felt less like walls. Only when I reached a small footbridge over the creek did I stop and catch my breath. I glanced back toward the logging road, but from here, it was just a dark opening in the trees, the path vanishing after a few yards. There was no sign of anyone, no movement, no sound except the water below. I stood there for a while, watching that shadowed entrance, wondering how long those prints had been behind me, wondering how close they had been before I noticed. I never saw anyone come out of that road, and when I eventually walked away, I didn't look back again. I just knew I'd never take that route in or out of the woods again. The trail was steep from the very start, the kind that zigzags up the side of a mountain in tight switchbacks, each one climbing just a little higher than the last. It was late morning, and the sun was already high enough to burn through the thin layer of clouds. The air was dry, sharp in my lungs, and the dirt under my boots was loose in some places, packed hard in others. My calves burned, my shirt was damp with sweat, and every time I rounded a corner, I'd catch sight of the slope stretching up above me like it had no end. I had been hiking alone for about 40 minutes. The trail was narrow, lined with dry brush, low shrubs, and the occasional cluster of pine trees. The smell of dust mixed with the faint resin of pine needles baking in the sun. Every so often, a gust of wind would whistle through the branches, carrying the sound of tiny pebbles rolling down somewhere far off. It was quiet in that kind of heavy, isolated way that makes you very aware of every noise you make. That's probably why I noticed it so quickly. The sound of another set of footsteps behind me. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Hiking alone can play tricks on you. The rhythm of your own boots crunching on dirt can echo in strange ways, especially in these narrow, echoing switchbacks. But after a few more turns, it was undeniable. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They weren't far, and more than that, they were matching me. The cadence was almost exactly the same as mine, like a shadow of my own steps. I slowed slightly, and the sound slowed. Quickened my pace, and it quickened. I came to the next bend in the trail and decided to stop entirely. I stepped aside, pretending to catch my breath, one boot resting on a rock as I looked downhill like I was admiring the view. The sound stopped too. Silence. Not even the wind for a moment. I waited, scanning the stretch of trail I just climbed, curved out of sight about 30 yards below. If someone was back there, they were standing still too. I half expected to see the top of a head, or maybe the flash of a jacket sleeve, but nothing moved. After a full minute, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some echo or another hiker keeping their distance. I adjusted my backpack straps and started walking again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was back immediately. Same pace. I didn't like it. My stomach had that tight, cold feeling like before bad news. I didn't want to turn around suddenly and make it obvious I was spooked, but I also didn't like the idea of someone following me this closely without saying anything. Most hikers I've met at least call out a greeting when they pass. The trail climbed higher, cutting through a section where tall dry grass grew on both sides. The stalks brushed against my legs as I walked. The sound of the other footsteps stayed right with me. I told myself that maybe they were just another hiker keeping pace, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to believe. Around the next bend, I spotted a thick pine tree on the inside of the curve, its branches dipping low. Without thinking too much, I stepped off the trail and moved around to the far side of the trunk, hiding myself from the view of anyone coming up. My breathing was a little too fast, my hands resting on the rough bark. I crouched slightly, keeping my head low, and waited. The footsteps kept coming. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Then a figure rounded the bend. They were tall, taller than me by at least a head, with broad shoulders under a dark hoodie. The hood was pulled forward so low I couldn't see their face at all. Their stride was steady, not rushed, but there was a heaviness in the way they moved. Deliberate, like they weren't just hiking, they were coming towards something they'd already decided on. They didn't glance around, didn't look at the scenery, didn't adjust their pack. Just kept walking up the trail exactly where I'd been seconds before. I stayed perfectly still, pressed against the tree. My heart thudded in my ears. I watched as they passed the spot where I'd stepped off. Their boots were worn, caked with dried mud. The hoodie's sleeves hung a little long, almost covering their hands. There was no sound from them other than the steps. No jingling gear, no water sloshing in a bottle. Just that steady crunch on the dirt. When they moved past and disappeared up the next switchback, I didn't get back on the trail. I waited. 1 minute. 2. I listened for their steps growing faint, but the sound faded more slowly than I expected, like they weren't getting much farther ahead. That was enough for me to know I wasn't staying up here. The slope beside me dropped down into a shallow ravine, choked with rocks and dry brush. Far below, I could see a thin line of asphalt, the road I'd parked on. It wasn't close, and it wasn't going to be an easy way down, but it was the only route that didn't involve following that figure's path. I swung my legs over the edge and started picking my way down. The dirt was loose, sliding under my boots, sending small stones rattling ahead of me. Every plant I grabbed for balance stabbed at my palms with tiny thorns. Twigs scratched my arms, my shins, catching on my socks. About 20 feet down, I paused to catch my breath and looked up. From here, the trail was partly visible through the branches. I could see the figure again. They had stopped. They were standing exactly where I'd left the trail, facing the tree I'd hidden behind. They didn't move for several seconds, just stood there. Then their head turned slightly, like they were scanning the slope below. I pressed myself against the dirt and brush, hardly daring to breathe. After another moment, they turned and kept walking up the trail, disappearing from view again. That was enough. I scrambled faster, half sliding, half running down the slope. The dry creek bed at the bottom was narrow, its bed of smooth stones shifting underfoot. I followed it downhill, the high banks on either side blocking any view from the trail above. The heat grew worse as I descended. The air was still, the sun burning straight down. Sweat ran down my back, soaking the waistband of my pants. My thighs ached from bracing myself on the uneven ground, but I kept moving. Eventually, the creek bed widened and leveled out near the road. I climbed up the bank, my boots slipping on the dry grass, and stepped onto the asphalt. My car was about 100 yards away. It looked small and out of place in the heat-shimmered emptiness. I walked fast, glancing back only once. Up on the slope, far above the road, a dark shape stood on a bend in the trail, looking down. I unlocked my car, yanked the door open, and slid inside. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled the keys. The engine roared to life, and I pulled away without another look. The whole drive back, I kept replaying it in my head. The matching footsteps, the silence, the way they'd stopped exactly where I'd been. There was no mistake, they weren't just another hiker. They were following me, and they hadn't kept going when I left. They'd stopped, they'd looked, they'd noticed. That image, them standing above the road, still watching, stayed in my mind long after the trail was gone from the rearview mirror. I don't hike alone anymore. Not on trails with blind corners. Not anywhere someone can match my steps without saying a word. Because I know now what it sounds like when someone is coming for you, one deliberate step at a time.